Hey guys, Paula here and welcome to my channel. I am just back from a 2-week trip along the east coast of Australia with my sisters, and I thought I'd just make this video to let you know my honest opinion on how the trip went, how much I spent, where I stayed, how I traveled, and my tips and tricks if you're thinking of doing this trip yourself, and just what I'd change if I were to do the trip again. So if you've watched my travel vlogs from this trip, thanks for watching, and if you haven't, I have 5 on my channel, one from Byron, one from Gold Coast and Brisbane, one from Noosa, the 4th one is Fraser and Rainbow Beach, and the last one is Airlie Beach and Whitsundays, so be sure to check them out. But anyways, let's get into this video. Okay, so first things first, I have my little notebook here. I did a calculation of how much each of us spent on this trip. So this is everything we spent bar food and drinks for the entire trip. So in this value, it's our accommodation, our transport, our flight back from Brisbane Airport in Airlie Beach, all our day trips as well. So each of us spent $1,790 on a 13-night trip, which I think is really good considering it's Australia and traveling around Australia is pretty expensive. The breakdown, we spent $755 each for accommodation, and that works out at around $58 per night, and this is 13 nights. But the way we saved was we did 2 night buses, so that's included in the 13 nights, if you get me. So we only paid for 11 nights accommodation and the 2 nights were on the bus. Would I do it again? I don't know. Yeah, our first night bus was at the very beginning of the trip. It was from Sydney to Byron, 11-hour trip. We definitely did not sleep and we were pretty dead when we arrived in Byron, but I mean, it's a great way to save if you're young and a backpacker. And our last night trip was from Rainbow Beach to Airlie Beach, and that was 14.5 hours. And one thing I'm gonna say, okay, we went to a greyhound, and if you are going on night buses especially, make sure to layer up. So if you're really hot outside, obviously you're going to be wearing a t-shirt and you might be hot on the bus, but make sure to bring jumpers or jackets or whatever, because we were freezing on the night bus. Like, I get that they have to probably put the aircon on to stay awake, the drivers, but geez, it was like 20 degrees on that bus and I was clinging onto my bag for dear life because I was that cold. We went with a greyhound bus on this trip. We got an East Coast Wimmet pass, and the way it works out is we got the 15-day one because we were going to be traveling for more than 7 days, and the way they have their passes is you can get a 7-day one, which is unlimited bus trips for 7 days, or a 15-day pass or a 30-day pass. And yeah, I think it was really good value, especially the fact that we got 2 night buses and that was included in the price. So for the 15-day pass, sorry, I'm just looking at my notes, it was $369, and then if you were to do a longer trip, the 30-day one is $449, which I think is really good. You could obviously drive as well. I think that would be a great idea if you wanted to see more off the beaten track places, but Greyhound covers a lot of different stops along the way, all the way from Melbourne up to Cairns. So yeah, I'd definitely go with Greyhound again. Because my sisters were only in Australia for 3 weeks and we only had 2 weeks to do this trip, we were on a bit of a time crunch. We opted for traveling on Greyhound from Sydney all the way up to Airlie Beach, and then catching a flight from Brisbane Airport, which is very near Airlie Beach, back down to Sydney, and that one-way flight cost us $110 each. Great idea, because the flight is only 2 hours and that will save a lot of hours of driving. And finally, included in that price that I mentioned at the start of the video are the day trips, and the day trips that we did were a Fraser Island day trip for $269, which I highly recommend. I know it probably sounds a bit expensive, but it's well worth it. And then $212 for a Whitsunday day trip, which was also amazing. And then $54 for the koala sanctuary. You can pay an additional fee to hold a koala then if you want as well. I think it's $30. So that is the $1,790 for this trip. Now let's talk about the route and how much time I spent in each place. So Byron Bay was the first spot and we spent 2 days here. I think that's a really good amount of time to spend in Byron if it's your first time, because Byron is a small place and everything's like really close. You could easily spend more time here if you wanted to though. Byron is really fun. Then we went to Gold Coast and we spent 1 day here. Personally, I am not a fan of Gold Coast, so I would scrap that if I was doing the trip again. But at the same time, it's such an iconic place, like a city right on the water. So if it's your first time in Australia, I think it could be cool to see it. But 1 day is plenty here. Then Brisbane, we did 2 days here and I'd do that again. Like, Brisbane is a city at the end of the day and there's quite a bit going on here, especially the koala sanctuary, which would take at least half a day. Noosa, we spent 2 days and I might be biased, but I love Noosa, so I would do that again. I'd actually spend an extra day and do the Everglades tour if I was coming back. And then Rainbow Beach was next. We spent 2 nights here because we were doing the Fraser Island day trip. But honestly, if I were to do it again, I would just spend 1 night because there's not that much to do in Rainbow Beach. And our last stop was Airlie Beach and we spent 3 days here and I would do that again. That's including our day trip to the Whitsundays. The weather wasn't in our favour when we were in Airlie, unfortunately, but it's still such a fun spot for going out and there's a lot of shopping opportunities as well. I was pretty happy with our route, like all in all. For accommodation, we were on a budget, but like a medium range budget. We didn't really want to stay in mixed dorms or anything, but at the same time, we weren't going to be spending loads of money on accommodation. So we stayed in a mix of private rooms in hostels, cheap hotels and apartments. And we didn't have any place where we felt unsafe or like absolutely hated, but I'm just going to talk about the 2 places that we really loved out of all the accommodation we stayed in. And the first one was Bermuda Villas in Noosa. This was like an apartment. It was super spacious and the guy who ran the place was really friendly. There was also a pool on site and the pool was pretty much empty for the entire time that we were there. The second place that we really loved was Magnum's in Airlie Beach. And this was a hostel and they let us check in really early. They were able to book our shuttle for us to the airport and they had a bar downstairs with a lot of life at night. So really recommend those 2 spots if you're looking for accommodation on the East Coast. Okay, so last tip for you guys, if you're planning on doing this trip between the months of December and February, this is summer in Australia and this is when places are going to be booked up really quickly. So I'd recommend booking your buses well in advance, especially if you're going with friends so that you can sit beside each other, and also accommodation just so that you can get the best deals so that the cheap ones aren't booked out really quickly. We booked our buses, I think 3 months before the trip, and then our accommodation 2 months to a month before traveling. Okay, I think that's it from me now. Hope you enjoyed this video. Hope it was helpful in some way. And if you've any other questions about doing the East Coast of Australia, just feel free to let me know in the comment section below. I'd be happy to answer any queries. And yeah, enjoy if you're going soon. It is such a great route. You'll see some amazing places. I think Fraser Island and Whitsundays and Noosa were my favorite spots on the entire trip. See you in my next video.